Hello, I am Bjorn, and welcome to the first episode of writing a Stormlight Archives adaptation. We're adapting the first book of the Stormlight Archives, The Way of Kings. This is one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite book series of all time. And here's the deal. You might be wondering why I'm adapting a book when I said I wouldn't. And the reason I'm doing it is the very reason I said I wouldn't do it before, and for a very specific reason. I've been on and off working on this Wheel of Time video. I had a finished version of it, and Amazon struck it, so I started reworking it, and then I decided, fuck it, I'm just going to make it bigger, and we're going to cover the whole series. So I'm now looking at the second season and my way for the third. So the video probably, like the first part, won't change, but in that video I make the point that the adapters of the Wheel of Time show feel the need to change everything, and they justify these in interviews by saying the source material wouldn't work in live action. It can't work as it's written on the page in the format, basically, among some other excuses. And I wondered, like, every time I've seen people make that kind of criticism, that, like, why don't they just adapt it one-to-one? It's not that hard. The people always say, well, why don't you do it then? And the reason is, obviously, I'm not working for a studio. I would if they would let me. And I decided to preemptively counter that criticism by doing it myself. And I thought about doing Wheel of Time, but I would have the benefit of hindsight. I would have already seen what didn't work, and I could fix it directly. And that criticism goes for, like, Rings of Power, Game of Thrones, any of those shows. They've already been adapted well, so it can't work. So I picked a franchise which has got a beloved book fan base, is a popular book. It's going to be adapted sooner or later, and I'm just getting ahead of the curve, and I'm doing it my own way. This is how I would adapt it. It's almost one-to-one. When I can, I have to make changes, and you'll see what I'm talking about if you've read the book. And so yeah, I'm doing the Stormlight Archives. It's a huge fantasy book. Many people say it's unadaptable. I'm going to try my best. Now, fans of the book, if you're watching this, I'm going to have to make some concessions here. Scenes are going to get cut. Things are going to get dwindled down. I had to cut some dialogue, had to cut some fight scenes. I'm actually doing this with the idea of thinking about the budget. And, like, I'm imagining this is like an HBO program as I write this, like something very expensive. So there are going to be battles, there are going to be CGI, but for the most part, I'm going to try to keep the budget manageable. I mean, if you think about, like, the Rings of Power is like one of the most expensive things ever. They've sunk like $200 million into each season. Same with House of the Dragon. Same with Wheel of Time. I want to say it's a little less, but it's around that ballpark. I think that's a reasonable sort of budget to imagine. So I've written my script. Now, here's the deal. This is not so much my own writing as a lot of my other videos, because I am adapting source material. So linked in below in the comments is a link to both the audiobook and the physical copy of the Stormlight Archives. Please pick these up. Get Brandon Sanderson your money. He's a genuinely awesome guy. He does a lot for the community, and he's helped me a ton. I've watched all of his writing lectures. So before watching the script, I recommend reading that. And I might, well, maybe, okay, I'll say this. Maybe watch the first episode or the second or first episode. Those account for part 1 of the book, which is available for free on YouTube, linked below. And watch those. Since they're available for free, I don't feel bad about putting out a version of them here. And then once you watch those parts, if you're interested in the Stormlight Archives, before you watch my later uploads in the series, please, please, please go pick up the book and read it. I don't want this to be a replacement for the original. This is an exercise for me to prove that these books can be adapted faithfully. And I don't want people to just watch this instead of reading the books, because the books are going to be better than anything I write here. Because, let's be honest, the books are always better. So, with all of this preamble out of the way, I have written the first episode. It covers basically the first 6 chapters, maybe the first 7. I'd have to look at it. And then some stuff from later chapters, which I've shuffled around for the sake of adaptation. The second episode will cover up to the end of part 1. I think most people who've read the book know what that covers. I plan to fit the entire series into this writing series. I plan to adapt the entire first book into 10 episodes. I think I can do it. I may be pushed over to 11, but I'm really shooting for 10 because that's the industry standard. So if y'all enjoy this, leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what changes I made that you like, what changes I made that you don't like. And again, please support the author. Please pick up a copy. These books are fucking incredible. And you're going to be able to read that book faster than I'm going to be able to upload content here. So do the books. All right. Enjoy. I'll give you episode 1. That's going to do it. Okay. Alrighty. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the script. We open on a shot of a massive stone hand reaching from the ground. We can see it's attached to a monster. Fuck it, Freddy. We can see it's attached to a massive stone monster. Dead bodies litter the ground around it. A man lumbers into view. His clothes are tattered as if they've been cut apart. They're also blood-stained. He carries a long, glowing greatsword with intricate designs on it. His body seems to faintly glow with blue mist. He walks through the field of battle until he reaches the top of a small cliff. Another man awaits atop the cliff. His clothes are similarly tattered. In front of him, several more glowing swords are jammed into the earth in a circle. The first man, who's named Kalek for the sake of this, says, "What is this, Yezrian? Where are the others?" Yezrian says, "Departed. You might call it a miracle. Only one of us died this time." Kalek says, "Kenanel." Yezrian says, "Yes. He died holding that passage by the northern waterway. That was his way, always one to fight a losing battle, even to his death." Kalek says, "He'll be back there now, with the fire and the pain." A somber moment passes between the two, as Kalek stares at the honor blades driven in the ground in a circle. Kalek says, "Yezrian, I cannot return this time. I cannot." Yezrian just says, "Leave your sword." Kalek says, "What?" Yezrian says, "I was chosen to wait for you. We weren't certain if you'd survived. A decision has been made. It is time for the Oath Pact to end." Kalek says, "Will that do?" Yezrian says, "Ishar believes that so long as there is one of us still bound to the Oath Pact, it might be enough. There is a chance we might end the cycle of desolations." Kalek's eyes go wide. "You're broken too." Yezrian says, "We all are." They look over the cliff. We can see thousands of bodies piled up and covered in blood. Monstrous stone creatures and other sorts of strange things lay broken around the battlefield. Kalek says, "They see us as divinities. They rely upon us, Yezrian. We're all that they have." Yezrian says, "They have the radiance. That will be enough." Kalek shakes his head. "He will not remain bound by this, the enemy. He will find a way around it. You know he will." Yezrian says, "Perhaps. And what of Kenanel?" Yezrian simply looks away and says, Better that one man should suffer than 10. It has been decided, Kalek. We will go our own ways, and we will not seek one another out. Our blades must be left. The Oath Pact ends now." Yezrian drives his own honor blade into the stone, leaving only 2 empty slots in the circle. Yezrian says, "We chose this burden willingly. Well, we can choose to drop it too, if we wish." Kalek says, "And what do we tell the people, Yezrian? What will they say of this day?" Yezrian smiles. "It's simple. We tell them that they finally won. It's an easy enough lie. Who knows? Maybe it'll turn out to be true." Yezrian leaves Kalek alone. Kalek sighs and spares a look for the other empty slot in the circle. He whispers, "I'm sorry, brother. Forgive me." He summons his own honor blade, then drives it into the circle. We're going to cut to an open building made of stone. A few small windows open to the outside world. Through them, we can see a storm rumbling in the distance. A high storm is approaching. 3 people stand in the room. 2 of them have skin which is marbled black and red. These are the Parshindi. I'm going to throw a picture of these guys up here because they're kind of hard to visualize. Even when I was reading the book, it took me forever to actually kind of figure out what these things looked like. This is like a fantasy race in the story. These are the Parshindi. So anytime I refer to a Parshindi or a Parchman, this is what I'm talking about. The second man is dressed in simple, plain robes. His head is shaved bald. The 2 Parshindi look nervous. One of them holds up a small stone. In its center, we can see a few veins of crystals. Parshindi begin to speak. They speak at an almost rhythmic cadence and hum as they do. I'm not even going to try to replicate that. For this, like, I would rely on Brandon if I was actually writing a TV show. I would let him describe to me what this sounds like, because, again, reading the book, I'm not really 100% clear what the Parshindy speaking sounds like. That's a Brandonism. That's something I would, like, I'd let the other author decide. So just sort of imagine they're speaking in like rap almost, like a really nice rhythm cadence to it. It has to be now. The king must die. It needs to be loud, and it needs to be violent. Be seen by some, and let them live. You will wear this. Parshindy hands him a white robe. Zeth looks at it confused. It is white. Bad costume for an assassination. Parshindy say, if you are to kill a man, he deserves to see you coming. It is our way. We're going to cut to a feast. We see men and women dancing and drinking in a massive stone room around a roaring fire. Parshindy bang on giant drums in the corner. We see Zeth standing against the back wall, wearing the white robes given to him. Suddenly, the drummers begin to play a different beat, wilder and more chaotic. Zeth begins to move. He forces his way through the revelry. We see one man drunkenly passed out on a large table. He's massive, muscled. Seth passes by one of the Parshindy drummers. They nod to him. Seth finally works his way to the hall. He begins to move towards the king's room. He moves almost robotically. He passes by a drunk man on the floor. The man laughs when he sees Zeth. He looks up and says, I see you. Zeth looks frightened for a second. The man says, I know you. You're my cousin. He drunkenly stupors back to the floor. Zeth simply moves on, nervousness fading. He approaches near the king's quarters, and we can see two guards standing against the wall. They carry spears. The first guard says, Hey you! Zeth looks up, but doesn't stop moving. The second guard says, He's a Shin. He's harmless. Go on now, this is no place for you. Zeth stops and doesn't move. The guard says, Well, what are you waiting for? Go! Zeth sucks in light from the lamps on the wall. Actually, I forgot to describe this in the script, so I'll describe it now. If you can imagine, the currency in this world are like little glass balls with gems in the center, and they, when left out in storms, they like absorb light and glow like a glow stick. So if you can imagine that these little balls are placed in the lamps on the wall to provide light. And so when I say Zeth sucks in Stormlight, he's literally sucking the light from these balls and it's coming into his mouth. So if you can imagine that. This is something that, like, for a TV show, you would visually design this. It flows from the lights on the wall, dimming them, and comes into his mouth. His skin begins to glow with mist as Stormlight leaks through his skin. The second guard, his eyes wide, whispers, What are you? Spirit or man? Zeth says, What am I? I am sorry. Zeth begins to levitate off the floor, his feet slowly lifting from the ground. He hovers midair, then flies towards the two guards, falling at full speed towards them, twisting so his legs face down. He knocks his boots into them. They both go flying back, slamming into the ground, their spears clattering to the floor. Zeth flips up and begins to walk towards the guards, his feet placing against the ground as if nothing had changed. He holds his hand out, open palms, beside him. He touches the first man, who floats into the air and sticks to the ceiling. We hear the sound effect of heartbeats begin to play into the score. 1, 2, 3 heartbeats. Zeth picks up his spear and props it on the floor. It glows faintly blue like Zeth's skin. The spear remains upright even when his hands leave it. We hear the guard stuck to the ceiling scream as he looks down towards the point of the spear. We can see he's slowly becoming unstuck. The other guard tries to run. 4, 5, 6, 7 heartbeats pass in the score. It's clear he's hurt his leg. 8, 9, 10 heartbeats. A massive glowing sword appears in Zeth's held-out hand, plopping into place and oozing with mist, as if it's cold. Zeth swings it, catching the massive... Zeth swings the massive blade, slicing the guard in two. Only, it doesn't cut him. It passes right through him as though it wasn't there. Then, his eyes burst into flames and he drops dead. His face is pale and his eyes burn with smoke. As Zeth walks, the guard behind him falls, plummeting onto the spear. We see it sink into his heart as he screams. Lightning rumbles outside and flashes through the small windows of the castle, illuminating Zeth. 3 more guards run into the room. Zeth floats up into the air again before flipping and running on the ceiling. He holds his blade out and cuts the first man on the arm. We see his arm turn gray and lifeless. It falls limp as the guard screams. The other 2 guards quickly fall as Zeth slides his blade through them. Their eyes catch fire and burn with smoke. And again, the blade does not actually cut them. Alrighty, here we go. One final guard turns the corner just in time to see Zeth enter a closet. Zeth shuts the door behind and bolts it. Using his shard blade, he begins to cut into the rock wall. 3 quick slashes leave a piece of the rock completely cut free. We can hear the guards gathering outside the doors. They begin to bang against it, trying to break in. Zeth touches the rock he's cut free. It begins to glow faintly. More and more blue light streams from the stone. We can see that Zeth is struggling to do what he's doing. Finally, he steps aside. The stone flies from the wall, smashing into the door and crushing the guards beyond. We can hear some screams and broken bone sounds. Zeth steps out into the hall through the broken doorway. Dead men are crushed against the wall, pinned between the rock. He turns and approaches the king's chamber. A quick slice of his shard blade opens the door up. Inside we see 4 men. 2 guards, and the 3rd is the king. The 4th is wearing an intricate, almost impossibly complex suit of armor. It begins to glow faintly blue. We see the king run through a side door with the 2 guards, but the shard bearer remains. In his shard plate, he holds a gauntleted hand out, and a shard blade falls into it, matching Zeth's own. Zeth tries to follow the king, the shard bearer steps into his path. It's going to be a fight. The shard bearer strikes an aggressive stance and holds his blade out. He strikes out with his blade, and Zeth dodges by sticking himself to the ceiling. He runs along the ceiling, swinging his blade down and landing a hit on the shard plate. We see a small crack appear on the back part of the armor. The shard bearer retaliates, swinging his sword up, narrowly missing Zeth as he continues to run along the ceiling. Another strike forces Zeth to roll. He flips midair, then lands on the floor. Zeth continues to dodge the shard bearer as the shard bearer launches attacks. Zeth begins to parry attacks with his own blade. He bounces backwards, then flies forward, floating through the air. The shard bearer tries to slice him, but Zeth falls backwards, and then downwards, continuing to fall straight towards the king, avoiding the attack. He lands in a crouch, then jumps forward, striking at the man's breastplate with his shard blade. The breastplate shatters into a molten concoction of blue pieces and sparks. Zeth flies backwards, then launches into a kick that lands on the shard bearer's side, sending him flying back into the side of the wall. Zeth turns to leave, chasing after the king. The shard bearer gets up on a knee and simply watches him leave. Zeth stops. He turns back to look at the shard bearer. He's confused. Why isn't the man following? His eyes go wide with realization. He says, "It is you. You are the king." The king stands onto one knee and then is able to make it back to his feet. He hits another stance. The 2 go back to exchanging blade blow after blow. Dodging or parrying attacks, Zeth bounces backwards again using his lashings. He dodges, attacks, slices, blocks, attacks, dodges. The 2 are in a stalemate. Finally, Zeth bounces backwards again. He touches various pieces of furniture in the room and they glow. They fly towards the shard bearer, smashing into him and shattering. The shard bearer bellows with rage. He launches for Zeth. He blocks an attack from the shard blade with his hand, causing small cracks to appear in the shard armor. With his other fist, he punches Zeth hard into the face, sending the man flying backwards. We can see blood flowing from him. He lands on the balcony, shattering through a door. We can see that his jaw is dislocated and one of his arms is broken. His shard blade falls to the floor and vanishes. The king in armor slowly lumbers towards him, blood dripping from his fist. Zeth begins to panic. He starts to touch the balcony, and we can see the entire thing blowing faintly blue. We can see Zeth's breath in the air, as if it's become suddenly cold. The king doesn't notice. He lumbers onto the balcony above Zeth. King Gavilar says, "Who sent you?" Zeth simply looks up at him. Then, the balcony shatters. The king is plummeted down, pulled to the ground by his shard plate. Zeth kicks him in the air, setting him off balance. The king crashes to the ground in a heap on his back. We can see a giant piece of wood sticking through his chest, impaling him through the broken piece of his armor. Zeth lands lightly next to him. The king looks over at him, blood running from his mouth. Gavilar, blood running from his mouth, laying flat against the ground, says, I expected you to come. You can kill Thydakar. He's too late. Zeth looks confused. I do not know who that is. Zeth is still slurring his words due to his broken jaw. He holds his hands to the side. We can hear the heartbeats begin to pick up in the score again. Gavilar says, Then who? Restoris? Sadius? I never thought. Zeth says, My masters are the Parshindi. Zeth's shard blade appears in his outstretched hand. Gavilar looks confused. The Parshindi? That makes no sense. Gavilar reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small sphere tied to a chain. It is completely black and glows darkness, as if it is black light, as if it's a black light. Gavilar says, You must take this. They must not get it. Tell my brother. He must find the most important words a man can say. His eyes fade, and his arm goes limp. The shard blade materializes next to the king. It appears from the air and falls from the floor with a clank. The king is dead. Zeth whispers to the body, Nothing makes sense anymore. It's all unraveling. I am sorry, King of Alethkar. I doubt that you care. Not anymore, at least. At least you won't have to watch the world end with the rest of us. Zeth bends down and dips the king's finger into his own blood. He writes, Brother, you must find the most important words a man can say in the king's blood. We see Zeth walk into the night, leaving the shard blade next to the dead king. The screen goes black. We see text that says, Part 1, Above Silence. 5 years later. We're going to fade into an army on a field. A young boy is standing at the front of a legion. He's quaking with fear. He says, I'm going to die, aren't I? An older man next to him says, Son, how old are you? The boy says, 15, sir. And what's your name? The boy answers, Sin, sir. The older man says, I'm Dalit. Sin says, Dalit, as if he's trying to remember the name. We see Sin look out at the massive army on the horizon, the one they're about to go to battle with. Sin says, I'm going to die, aren't I? Dalit says, No, boy. You're going to be just fine. Keep your head on straight and stay with the squad. Sin says, But I've barely had 3 months training. I can barely hold the spear. Stormfather, I'm dead. I can't. Dalit cuts him off and says, Son, you're going to be fine. Sin says, How can you know? Dalit says, Because, lad, you're in Kaladin's Stormblessed squad. The other soldiers all nod, as if on cue. A voice calls out, Dalit! A young man, maybe 18 years old, approaches Dalit, holding a spear in his hand. All of the men snap to attention. We see Sin's eyes light up. This is Kaladin Stormblessed. But he's so young. He can't look a day older than 18. Sin doesn't look comforted. Kaladin says, Dalit, we're going to have a new recruit. I need you to... He notices Sin. Dalit nods and says, He found his way here just a few moments ago, sir. I've been getting him ready. Kaladin says, Well done. I paid good money to get that boy away from Gart. That man's so incompetent, he might as well be fighting for the other side. What do you think about the field? Dalit looks out over the field as if thinking. That dip next to the 2 boulders on the far right. Kaladin says, Footing's too rough. Dalit says, Aye, perhaps it is. What about that short hill over there? Far enough to avoid the first fall, close enough to not get too far ahead. Kaladin says, Looks good to me. Dalit says, The rest of you louts hear that? The men all nod as if on cue again. Kaladin says, Keep an eye on the new boy, Dalit. He won't know the signs. Dalit says, Of course. Kaladin looks at the boy and smiles. He says, Stay firm. Kaladin moves down the line, leaving Sin and Dalit.
Dalit says, "Don't worry, son. You'll be fine. Squad leader Kaladin is lucky." A Vaden soldier standing next to them says, "That's right. Kaladin, he's storm blessed. Right sure he is. We only lost, what, one man last battle?" Sin says, "But somebody did die." Dalit says, "People always die. Our squad loses the fewest. You'll see." Kaladin jogs back. He's standing at the front of the men. Dalit says, "At the ready, men." Around them, we can hear the banging of spears on shields, and even some cheering. Kaladin's men don't cheer. Their spears stay right at their side. Kaladin says, "Steady, men." A man rides past on a white horse. His eyes are a bright pale green. The Light Eyes officer says, "Be ready to fight. I want their blood, men. Fight and kill." Dalit whispers to Sin, "Be ready to run, lad." Sin says, "Run? But we've only been trained to march in formation, to stay in our lines." Dalit says, "Sure, but most of the men don't have that much training. Those who can fight will end up getting sent to the Shattered Plains to battle to Farshindi. Kaladin's trying to get us in shape to go there, to fight for the king." Dalit gestures to the front of the lines as the men next to them. Dalit gestures to the line of men next to them. Most of these will break and charge. The Light Eyes aren't good enough commanders to keep them in formation. So stay with us and run. Sin says, "Should I have my shield out?" He looks down the line so we can see the other men pulling shields off their back. We see anticipation sprint oozing from the ground around them. They appear like long red flat strings of goop dripping from the ground. Kaladin's men leave their shields on their back. Before Dalit has a chance to answer, a horn blares. Dalit yells, "Go!" We see Kaladin's troops rush out in front. The rest of the army starts marching in ranks behind them. However, that quickly devolves into both armies running at each other at full speed. We can see enemy archers pull back and prepare to loose a massive volley of arrows. As the arrows fly, they blot out the sun in their numbers. Sin tries to pull his shield free from his back to catch the arrows, but Dalit stops him and pulls him along with the rest of Kaladin's men. They seem unafraid. We can see the rest of the army stop and hold up their shields. Sin screams as the arrows begin to fall back to earth, but he doesn't die. Instead, the arrows start landing behind him, where the bulk of the army is. We hear screams of men as the arrows find bodies. Sin looks awed. "How did you know?" Dalit says, "They want the arrows to hit where the men are most crowded, where they have the greatest chance of finding a body. Kaladin knows these things." Kaladin's men reach the hill and form a V formation in the middle, with Sin placed between them. Men approach them and die. Kaladin's men are ruthless and well trained. We can see some small piles of dead and dying begin to build up as Kaladin's spearmen find their marks. Kaladin surveys the field and hammers on his shield 3 times. Suddenly, the V formation shifts to a circle, covering the hill. His men are trained to know the signs. The battle continues like that for a while, until Kaladin looks out over. He bangs his shield 3 more times, and the men begin to retreat. We can see that the battle is losing for their side. The other armies around them are beginning to crumple, getting overrun by the enemy army. They begin to retreat, backing up with their spears out. In all the chaos, Sin gets separated. He gets left behind on the battlefield. Suddenly, he's surrounded by enemy men. They approach him with their spears out. Sin, panicked, holds his ground. He'd seen the others picked off as they run. He holds his spear out and screams as the man approaches. He thrusts his spear out, prepared to stab his opponent. However, the enemy easily sidesteps it. The soldier retaliates by sticking his own spear right into Sin's leg. Sin crumples to the ground as the man pulls his spear free. He raises up, preparing to skewer Sin through. The spear rushes towards him and is deflected. Kaladin stands before Sin, spear in his hand. He twirls it around and catches the other soldier through the neck. He pulls the spear free, letting it loose a shower of blood. 4 more soldiers approach. Kaladin pulls a knife from his sheath and tosses it, sending it right into the eye of one of the men. Then he's in the melee. Kaladin deflects a strike from his left and plants his spear into the gut of a soldier on his right. He twirls the spear around, taking the man on his left in the shin. He pulls a dagger free from his belt and sticks it into the man's heart, killing him. The last man looks terrified. He turns to run, and Kaladin sticks the spear through his back. He turns to Sin. He pulls out a bit of white cloth from the bag at his waist and begins to meticulously bandage the wound on his leg. Dalit and 4 other men ride up. "Had me worried there, sir, running off like that." Kaladin looks up at Dalit and says, Raise the red banner. Sin, Torritor, you're going back with the boy. Delit, hold here. Amaram's line is bulging in this direction. We could be safe soon. Dalit says, and you, sir. Kaladin gestures towards the battle. We see a man on horseback wearing full plate armor. He swings a bloody mace from side to side. Sin looks awed. A shard bearer. Dalit laughs. No, thank the Stormfather, no. It's a light-eyed officer. Shard bearers are too valuable to waste on a minor border dispute. Kaladin watches the light eyes with obvious hatred. Sub-squads, 2, 3, pincher pattern. We're taking the Bright Lord off his throne. Dalit looks surprised. You sure that's wise, sir? We've got wounded. Kaladin nods to the man. That's one of Howlow's officers. He might be the one. Dalit says, you don't know that, sir. Kaladin says, regardless, he's a battalion lord. If we kill an officer that high, we're all but guaranteed to be on the next group sent to the Shattered Plains. We're taking him. Imagine it, Dalit. Real soldiers. A war camp with discipline and light eyes with integrity. A place where all our fighting will mean something. The Shattered Plains. Dalit nods. He knows it's worth the risk. Kaladin and his man ride off, and the camera follows them. They clash into the honor guard of the Light Eyes. Kaladin's spear finds one through the chest and another through the neck. The Light Eyes on horseback turns to face him. He raises his mace and begins to charge. Kaladin smiles. He flips a knife up into his hand and throws it. It catches the Light Eye through the slit of his helmet. We see the knife plunge into his left eye, killing him. The armored noble falls off his horse and plummets to the ground. Kaladin's men let out cheers of joy. However, they soon turn to screams of panic. Kaladin turns and we see another knight on horseback, riding towards Sin and the other wounded. Only this is no normal knight. Both his armor and his sword glow faintly. Their armor is so fantastically complex that it seems impossible, and the sword, longer and bent in strange shapes that should be impossible. He's a shard bearer with a shard blade. Kaladin screams, no! He starts to run towards the shard bearer, but it's too late. A single arc of his greatsword passes through Dalit and Sin. It doesn't cut their flesh, but their eyes catch fire, and they fall to the ground. The knight turns to face Kaladin, shard blade out. His eyes seem to grow red between his helm. We hear a cry from nowhere. Time for slop, pigs! We see Kaladin open his eyes. Only, he looks different. His face is more gaunt, and his eyes are sunken. His black hair is long and tangled, and he looks panicked, trapped in a dream of the past. However, the most notable change of Kaladin, a large symbol is burned into his forehead, a brand. He's sitting in a wooden cage with wheels. Other men surround him. Most look even skinnier than he is. All have symbols on their forehead. A man outside of the cage hands Kaladin a bowl of nasty-looking gruel. Kaladin digs his dirt-crusted hands into it and eats. We hear a voice. Hey! Kaladin looks up from his meal. We see a young boy, maybe 13 or 14, standing in front of him. You're not like the others, the boy says. You have a shash brand. Dangerous. I heard the other guards talking. You tried to escape before, they said. You have escaped before. Kaladin says nothing and continues to eat. The kid holds out a bowl of half-eaten food. The young slave says, Look, take me with you next time, and I'll give you this. Half my food until we get away. Please. We can see hunger sprint appear around the boy. They crawl around like brown flies circling him. The slave says, Well? Kaladin says, You're an idiot. If you gave me half your food, you'd be too weak to escape if we were to flee. Which I won't, because it doesn't work. The boy says, But... Kaladin says, 10 escape attempts in 8 months, fleeing from 5 different masters. And how many have worked, boy? I'm back where I started. The slave says, Well, I mean, you're still here. Kaladin says, Look, kid. The truth is, you can't hide as a slave. Not with the brand on your forehead. Oh, I got away a few times. But they always find me, and I always went back. So no, I give up. I can't help you. So give up. I can't help you. The kid looks dejected. He turns and sits down in another part of the cart and begins to eat the food with his hands. We're gonna cut to a busy shipping dock. We open on a ship dock in a massive and busy harbor. A young girl with bright red hair leans against the deck of a boat, watching an old sailor talk to an attendant on the docks. She occasionally adds to a sketch of the scene in her little booklet. Another sailor walks up beside her as the one below turns their head back to the ship. The one below calls up, "Captain! No message, sir. Dock register says that Yasna hasn't left yet." The captain, whose name is Captain Tazbek, says, "Ah! The hunt is finally over. We found your princess, Brightness." Shalon, the redhead woman, says, "Bless the heralds." The captain says, "Must be your pretty face that brought the favorable winds. The windspreads themselves were entranced by you, Brightness, Shalon, and let us hear." Shalon makes a funny face, and the captain smiles. He says, "Ah, I can see you have a reply. I see it in your eyes, miss. Spit it out. Words ain't meant to be kept inside, you see. They're free creatures, and if locked away will unsettle the stomach." Shalon says, "It's not polite." The captain laughs again, a thick belly laugh. "Months of travel and still you claim that. I kept telling you that we're sailors. We forgot how to be polite the moment we first stepped foot on a ship. We're far beyond redemption now." Shalon says, "I was just thinking this. You say that my beauty coaxed the winds to deliver us to Carbranth with haste. Wouldn't that imply that on other trips my lack of beauty was to blame for us arriving late?" The captain says, "Ah, young miss. The lads and I will miss your clever tongue. I'm not sure what we will do without it." Shalon says, "Sail, likely. And eat and sing, watch the waves, all the other things you do now, only you'd have rather more time to accomplish it, as you won't be stumbling across a beautiful girl as she sits on your deck sketching and mumbling to herself. But you have my thanks, Captain, for a trip that was wonderful, if somewhat exaggerated in length." The captain bows and says, "It was a pleasure to have you, young miss. Your Brightness Yasna. She'll undoubtedly be at the conclave, you see." Shalon says, "Oh, where the Palaneum is?" The sailor says, Yes, and the king lives there too. It's at the center of the city, so to speak. Except it's at the top. Well, anyway, Brightness Yasna, Colin, is sister to a king. She will stay nowhere else, not in Carbranth. Yalp here will show you the way. We can deliver your trunk later." He gestures to the sailor who's just walked back up onto the ship. Shalon says, "Many thanks, Captain. Shalor Macbach Nor." The captain smiles, hearing his familiar language. He says, "Makai Blad Fortuitus. We'll wait here in this dock for 2 days. There's a high storm coming, you see, so we can't leave. If the situation with the Brightness Yasna does not proceed as you hoped, we will take you back to Yakaved. Though I can't imagine she wouldn't take a young lady as fine as yourself for a ward, not with all the work you put into chasing her down." Shalon bows and says, "Thank you again." The captain says, "'Tis nothing, young miss. Nothing but what we do anyway. We can take on goods here and all. Besides, that's a right nice likeness of my wife you gave us the other day for my cabinet. Right nice indeed. Be careful with yourself, lass. Even in a safe city like Carbranth hides dangers. Keep your wits about you." Shalon says, "I should think I would rather prefer to keep my wits inside my skull, Captain." The captain smiles and gestures to Yalb, the other sailor, who takes Shalon down. He gestures to a palanquin, for those who don't know, it's like a covered thing that's carried through cities, often on wheels. Like a little room, basically. Like a little carriage, but smaller. It's like a carriage, but smaller, and sometimes pulled by horse, sometimes pulled by men. I don't know in this particular instance. I'd let, set designers do that stuff. He gestures to it and says, "You want a ride? I found a palanquin for you, Brightness." Shalon says, "Yes, please." We're going to see some shots of them riding through the city. It's big and old and, medievally. I'm assuming you'd film in some real life city, probably somewhere in Spain or, I don't know, Europe somewhere. Eventually they pull into a large building, the Palaneum. As Shalon gets out, she hands Yalb a sphere, one of the currency I talked about earlier. Shalon says, "This is for you." Yalb says, "Brightness, this is too much." Shalon says, "It's partially out of thanks. It's also to pay you to sit here and wait for a few hours in case I return." "Wait a few hours for a fire, Mark? That's wages sailing for a week." Shalon says, "Then it should be more than enough to make certain you don't wander off." Yalb says, Indeed it is, Brightness. I'll be right here. Walks inside of the great stone building, and almost immediately a servant comes up to greet her. Shalon says, I seek Yasna Kolin. I have word that she is within these walls. The servant nods and says, I will take you to wait for her. Shalon nods and follows the servant deeper into the building. We're going to cut back to the slave cart. The slaver opens up the side of the cart, and we see the men begin to slowly walk out of the slave cart. The slaver cries, Do your business quick and don't go far. If you run or hide, we'll find you, and Blue's cudgel will crack your skull open. We see Kaladin lumber out of the cage and walk a short way into the woods. He turns to pee and stops. He notices a bush with dark purple leaves. Kaladin just stares at it. We're going to cut to the past in a flashback. We see young Kaladin rush into a simple stone home. His father is standing there waiting for him. A woman lies on a table in the center of the room. She snores lightly, and we can see some blood dripping off the side of the table. Kaladin says, I'm sorry I'm late, Father. I can help you now. Lirin, Kaladin's father, says, Your mother already helped me. The work is done. Kaladin says, Is Sani alright? Lirin says, She'll live, but she lost a finger. No choice there. Kaladin says, That's good, I suppose. Lirin asks, Where were you? Kaladin says, With Jam. Lirin smiles. Jam is 2 years your senior. I doubt he has much fondness for spending his time with kids younger than he is. Kaladin says, His father started training him in the quarterstaff. Tien and I went to see what he's learned. Jam's father was a soldier in Bright Lord Amaram's army. He's a real Light Eyes, not like that stuffy old Wistio. Lirin says, I know about Jam's father. I've had to operate on that lame leg of his 3 times. A gift from his glorious days as a soldier. Kaladin says, We need soldiers. Would you have our borders violated by the Thalans? Lirin laughs to himself. Halena is an island kingdom. They don't share a border with us. Kaladin says, Well then, they could attack from the sea. Lirin says, They're mostly tradesmen and merchants. Everyone I've ever met has tried to swindle me, but it's hardly the same thing as invading. Kaladin says, Well, we fight someone. Lirin says, Yes, King Gavilar always finds people for us to fight. That much is true. Kaladin says, So we need soldiers. Like I said. Lirin says, We need surgeons more. Son, you nearly cry each time someone is brought to us. You grind your teeth anxiously during even simple procedures. What makes you think you could actually hurt someone? Kaladin says, I'll get stronger. Lirin says, That's foolishness. Who put these ideas in your head? Why would you want to learn to hit other boys with sticks? Kaladin says, For honor, Father. Who tells stories of surgeons for Harold's sake? Lirin says, The men and women of those whose lives we save. That's who tells stories of surgeons. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, son. Those who save lives, and those who take lives. And what of those who protect and defend? The one who saved lives by taking them. Lirin says, That's like trying to stop a storm by blowing harder. Ridiculous. You can never protect by killing. His father sighs, then turns to face him. What are the properties of winterwort? Kaladin rolls his eyes, but answers, Bitter taste which makes it safer to keep, since people won't eat it by accident. Crush it into powder and mix it with oil. Use 1 spoonful per brick weight of the person you're drugging. Induces deep sleep for 5 hours. Kaladin repeats it almost robotically. Lirin continues, And how can you tell if someone has the grinding coughs? Kaladin says, Thirst, trouble sleeping, swelling of the throat, and of course coughing. Lirin holds up a jar of purple leaves. The same leaves we just saw in the bush. And this? What properties does Black Bane have? Kaladin says, It's poison. Even a small amount can kill when swallowed. Lirin says, See? You've got such a good mind, son. It took me years to learn what you've done in months. I've been saving, and I'd like to send you to Kharbranth when you turn 16. To train with the real surgeons. Kaladin's eyes grow wide. What? You have a gift from the heralds themselves. You could be 10 times the surgeon I am. Don't dream the small dreams of other men. Our grandfathers bought and worked us to the second non so that we could have full citizenship and the right to travel. Don't waste that on killing. Don't take lives. We see Kaladin back in front of the purple bush with the poison leaves. His hand reaches out to grab one. He stops, then hardens. He plucks 3 leaves and holds them in his hand. He works his way back to the slave cart. He sits, looking at the poison leaves in his hand. We can see that his mind is reeling. He's trying to decide if this is something he really wants to go through with. This is something he actually wants to do. And then we hear a voice. A female voice. Ooh, what's that? Paladin quickly closes his hand up tight so that the leaf can't be seen. A woman appears in front of him, about an inch tall, made of blue light, and is transparent, like a fairy. She lands on his hand and looks at the closed hand, trying to see what's inside, trying to look at it from all angles. What is it? You can show me. I won't tell anyone. Is it a treasure? Have you cut off a piece of the knight's cloak and tucked it away? Or is it the heart of a beetle, so tiny yet so powerful? Kaladin says nothing and continues to look out of the slave cart, ignoring the little Sprin. The Sprin says, Kaladin, why must you ignore me? Kaladin's eyes grow wide. He turns to look at the Sprin. What did you say? The Sprin giggles and flies away, bounding into the air, then turning into blue leaves that blow away in the wind. Kaladin looks around. Did any of you hear that? An older slave looks up. Hear what? Kaladin says, that wind Sprin used my name. The older slave says, Sprin can't know names. They're too daft. Now sit down and be quiet, you mad fool. I don't want them skipping the water again. Kaladin sits down and looks around. The wind Sprin is gone. He looks at his hands. The leaves there were broken into pieces as he squeezed. He sighs and starts to gather up the pieces on the front of his hand to keep them from blowing away. The wind Sprin appears again on his hand, looking down. Those leaves look interesting. You must like them a lot, don't you? Kaladin says, How do you know my name? The wind Sprin says, Why don't you fight? You did before. Now you've stopped. Kaladin says, Why do you care, spirit? The wind Sprin shrugs. I don't know. But I do. Isn't that odd? The Sprin turns to regard the leaves again. People don't eat leaves, you know, Kaladin. Kaladin's eyes go wide again, then narrow. How do you know my name? The Sprin shrugs. How do you know it? Kaladin says, I know it because it's mine, Stormit. My parents told it to me. I don't know. The Sprin says, See? Well, I don't know either. Kaladin says, Fine. But why are you using my name? The wind Sprin says, Because it's polite, and you are impolite. Kaladin says, Sprin don't know what that means. The wind Sprin points and says, See, there. Impolite. So why don't you fight? Kaladin says, I can't fight. The Sprin says, You did before. Kaladin leans his head back and sighs. I'm too tired, Sprin. The wind Sprin says, And you've been tired before. Kaladin says, I've failed, spirit. Must you torment me so? They're dead, all of them. Sin, Dalit, Tukes, Takers, Tien. I failed them all. A man next to Kaladin lets off another volley of coughs. Kaladin studies him for a moment, then lays his head back. I've failed. We're going to cut to Shallan waiting on a table for Yasna. A young man, maybe 22, approaches the table and says, excuse me, Brightness. I thought this was the alcove of Yasna Kholin. Shallan says, It is. The man says, Oh, and you're waiting for her too. Shallan says, Yes. The man says, Would you mind terribly if I waited with you? Shallan bows deeply. Of course not, Ardent. And Ardents are like priests, basically. Just to explain that for people who don't know. Shallan stands and offers the Ardent her chair. He says, I can't take your seat, Brightness. I'll fetch for myself another one. He rushes off and returns with a chair. He sits down and notices drawings on the table. The drawings that Shallan has been making. He asks, Did you do these, Brightness? Shallan says, Yes, Ardent. The Ardent says, No need to be so formal. Please, I am Brother Capsule. Or just Capsule, really. It's fine. And you are? Shallan Devar. Capsule says, By Vedaletev's golden keys, Brightness, did Yasna Kholin teach you this skill with the pencil? Shallan says, No, Ardent. Capsule says, Still so formal. Tell me, am I so intimidating as that? Shallan says, I have been brought up to show respect to Ardents. Capsule says, Well, I myself find that respect is like manure. Use it when needed and growth will flourish. Spread it on too thick and things just start to smell. Shallan says, An Ardent is a representative of the Almighty himself. To show such lack of respect to you would be to show it to the Almighty. Capsule says, I see. And is this how you would respond if the Almighty himself appeared to you here, with all this formality and bowing? Shallan says, Well, no. And Capsule says, and how would you react? Shallan says, I suspect with screams of pain. It is written that the Almighty's glory is such that any who look upon him would immediately be burned to ash. Capsule says, I see. Clever thought. But you still appear conflicted. What must I do to put you at ease? Shall I step onto this desk here and do a jig? No objection? Well, then. Shalon stops him as he begins to climb onto the table. No, please. I promise not to respect you any longer. Capsule says, the table jig is a threat that almost always works. I've only ever had to go through with it once, due to a lost bet against my brother Leihanin, the master ardent of our monastery, nearly keeled over in shock. Shalon says, you're an ardent. It is forbidden for you to have possessions. What would you have bet? Capsule says, 2 dead breaths of a winter's rose fragrant, and the sunlight's warmth on your skin. We can be rather creative at times. Years spent marinating in a monastery can do that to a man. Now, you were about to explain to me where you learned such skill with a pencil. Shalon says, practice. I should suspect that is how everyone learns eventually. Capsule says, wise words again. I'm beginning to wonder which of us is an ardent. But surely you had a master to teach you. Shalon says, Dondos the Oil-sworn. Capsule says, a true master of pencils if ever there was. Not that I would doubt your word, Brightness, but I am rather intrigued as to how Dondos Harrowden would have trained you in arts, as, last I checked, he's been suffering from a rather terminal and perpetual ailment, namely, that of being dead for 300 years. Shalon says, my father had a book of his instructions. Capsule says, you learned this from a book. Shalon says, yes? Capsule says, I need to read more. Shalon laughs. Capsule says, you are from Yakavet, I presume. From the hair or the accent? Shalon asks. Capsule says, from the way you treat ardents. The Vaden Church is by far the most traditional. I have visited your lovely country on 2 occasions. While your food sits well in my stomach, the amount of bowing and scraping you showed the ardents made me uncomfortable. Shalon says, perhaps you should have danced on a few tables. Capsule says, I considered it, but my brother and sister ardents from your country would likely have died of embarrassment. I would hate to have that on my conscience. The Almighty is not kind to those who kill his priests. Shalon says, I think that killing in general should be frowned upon. Capsule says, I suppose it would. I must admit, I stepped in here expecting indifference, not deference. How can someone as religious as you come to be part of the entourage of Yasna Kolen, who denies the existence of the Almighty? Shalon says, Father, it appears I've inadvertently misled you, Brother Capsule. I am not associated with Brightness Yasna. Not yet, anyway. I've been trying to get her to take me as a ward. Capsule says, I see. Shalon says, I'm sorry. Capsule says, for what? You did nothing wrong. If you would do me a favor, child. Shalon says, anything. Capsule raises an eyebrow. Shalon corrects, anything reasonable. Capsule says, by whose reason? Shalon says, mine, I guess. Capsule says, pity, then I will limit myself. If you would kindly let Brightness Yasna know that I called upon her. Shalon says, she knows you? Capsule says, oh, I wouldn't say that. I'd hope she'd heard my name, though, since I've requested an audience with her numerous times. Shalon says, you want to try to convert her, I presume? Capsule says, I do. She presents a unique challenge. I don't think I could live with myself if I didn't at least try to persuade her. Shalon says, and we wouldn't want you unable to live with yourself, as the alternative harks back to that nasty habit of almost killing ardents. Capsule says, exactly. Anyway, I think a personal message from you might help where written requests have failed. Shalon says, I'll try. Capsule says, well, if she refuses, it only means I'll be back. That would mean, hopefully, that we shall meet each other again, so I look forward to it. Shalon says, I as well, and I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Capsule says, Brightness, please, don't take responsibility for my assumptions. Shalon says, I should hesitate to take responsibility for you in any regard, Brother Capsule, but still, I feel bad. Capsule says, it will pass. I'll do my best to make you feel well. Is there anything you're fond of? Other than respecting ardents and drawing amazing pictures, that is. Shalon says, jam. Capsule cocks his head. Shalon says, I like it. You asked what I was fond of. It's jam. Capsule says, so it shall be. Capsule leaves her, and Shalon quickly goes back to her sketching. A servant says, Brightness Yasna will see you now. Salon looks up, surprised. She quickly gathers her things and follows the servant down the hall. We're gonna cut back to the slave cart. The man next to Kaladin is continuing to cough. It's raspy and harsh. It's getting worse. The slaver looks over at him and points. One of the armed men with a cudgel, which is like a club, by the way, for those who don't know, walks into the cart and starts to pull the man out of it. Kaladin looks up and says, "Stop!" The man stops, and the slaver holds a hand and looks to Kaladin. Nervously, they're afraid of him. Kaladin says, "It's called the grinding cost. He will live if you give him an extra ladle of water every 2 hours for 5 days or so. You'll have to force it down his throat. Mix in sugar if you have any, and he'll live." Tavakov, which is a hard name to say, sorry, who is the slaver, says, "Pull him out." Kaladin looks relieved. He sits back down. The man is pulled out. They drag him aside of the cart, and then Tavakov says something to his guard we can't hear, and then it begins. They begin to savagely beat the old man with the cudgel, once, twice, 3 times, bashing him on the head. We can see blood running from the old man. He's dead. Kaladin screams, "No!" He leaps across the cage and slams his hands into the bar. Kaladin says, "Storm you! He could have lived, you bastard!" Tavakov says, "He would have gotten you all sick, you see. I would not lose an entire wagon for one man." Kaladin said, "He's past the spreading stage. If any of us were going to catch it, we would have done it by now." Tavakov says, "Hope that you don't. I think he was past saving." Kaladin says, "I told you otherwise." Tavakov says, "And I should believe you, deserter? A man with eyes that smolder in hate? You would kill me, but I care not. So long as you are strong when it comes time for sales, you should bless me for saving you from that man's sickness." Kaladin looks down at his hands and notices that he's dropped the leaves in all the chaos. His one chance to escape is gone. His chance for revenge. He falls to the floor of the cart. Tavakov stops, walking away, as if remembering something. He turns around and approaches the cart again. Kaladin looks up at him. Tavakov says, "I'll tell you what. I know you can read, Shashbrand. I was informed. You aren't from here. You're from here, aren't you? Could you help me find my way? We know we're close, and we have a map, but I can't read it. There could be a great reward in it for you. Extra food and water, and maybe I would let you help the next sick man." Kaladin looks up and meets his eyes. "Give me the map." Tavakov says, "A good choice." Kaladin takes the map and looks at it. Then he starts ripping it into pieces. Tavakov yells at his 2 guards and points to Kaladin. They start to approach him, and Kaladin stares them down, with eyes like fire. They stop and back up. They simply shake their heads at their boss. Tavakov nervously approaches the cage again. "I see you are clever, deserter. By shredding my map, you've made yourself invaluable to me. My other slaves, they aren't from this area, and I have never come this way. You can bargain. What is it you wish to exchange for leading us? I can promise you the extra meals each day, should you please me, or any other thing you might ask of me, within reason." Kaladin says, "You want me to lead the caravan?" Tavakov says, "Instructions will be acceptable." Kaladin says, "All right. First, find a cliff." Tavakov says, "That will give you an advantage to see the area?" Kaladin says, "No. It will give me something to throw you off of." Tavakov says, "You hate me. That is good. Hatred will keep you strong. You will sell for much more. But you will not find vengeance on me unless I first have a chance to take you to market. I will not let you escape. Perhaps someone else would. You want to be sold, you see. That's your only chance for vengeance." Kaladin says, "I don't want vengeance." Tavakov says, "No vengeance." Kaladin shakes his head. "It doesn't work. I learned that lesson long ago." Tavakov says, "Long ago? You can't be older than 18 years, deserter. You are young. You could escape from this fate of yours. Men have been known to live long beyond a slave's brand. You could pay off your slave price, you see, or convince one of your masters to give you freedom. You could become a free man again. It is not so unlikely." Kaladin says, "I'll never be free of these brands, Tavakov. You must have known that I've tried and failed to escape 10 times over. It's more than these glyphs on my head that make your mercenaries wary. Kolakov says, past failures do not prove that there's not a chance in the future. Yes. I'm finished. I don't care. Besides, you don't believe what you're saying. I doubt a man like you would be able to sleep at night if he thought the slaves he sold would be free to seek him out one day. Kolakov says, perhaps, deserter, perhaps. You are right. Or perhaps I simply think that if you were to get free, you would hunt down the first man who sold you into slavery, you see. High Lord Amaram, was it not? His death would give me warning so I could run. Kaladin let some of his rage show on his face. Yes. So you were not so honest when you said you did not thirst for vengeance, I see. How could you know about Amaram? I've changed hands 12 times since then. Kolakov says, men talk. Slavers more than most. Must be friends with one another, you see, for nobody else will stomach us. Kaladin says, then you know that I didn't get these brands for deserting. Savakov says, ah, but it must be what we pretend, you see. Men guilty of high crimes, they do not sell well. So with that Shash brand on your head, it will be difficult enough to get a good price for you. If I cannot sell you, then well, we will not want that status. So we must play a game together. I will say you are a deserter, and you will say nothing. It is an easy game, I think. Kaladin says, it's illegal. Devakov says, for all you know, we are not an Alethkar, so there is no law. Besides, desertion was the official reason for your sale. Claim otherwise, and you will gain a reputation for dishonesty. Nothing but a headache for you. Tavakov says, but you just said you have no desire for vengeance against me. Kaladin says, I could learn. Talakov says, and if you have not learned that already, then you probably never will. Besides, did you not threaten to throw me off a cliff? I think you have learned already. But now, we must discuss how to proceed. My map has met with an untimely demise, you see. Kaladin says, I don't know. I've never been this way either. Vakaz narrows his eyes and says, I believe you, deserter. A pity. Well, I shall trust in my memory. The map was poorly rendered anyway. I'm almost glad you ripped it up, for I was tempted to do the same. If I should happen across any portraits of my former wives, I will see that they cross paths with you and take advantage of your unique talents. The man turns to leave, and Kaladin curses to himself, then sits back down. His windsprint appears again. What was that for? Kaladin says, I almost find myself liking him. What? After what he did? I didn't say Tavakov wasn't a bastard. He's just a likable bastard. Those are the worst kind. When you kill them, you can end up feeling guilty for it. The windsprint looks at him and says, Why don't you cry? Kaladin, caught off guard by the random question, says, What? The windsprint says, The others cry at night, but you don't. Kaladin says, Why cry? What would that change? The windsprint says, I don't know. Why do men cry? Kaladin says, Ask the almighty, little Spren, not me. We see Shallan being led down the hall until we see a woman with long, dark hair and an elegant dress, wearing some sort of strange jeweled object on her hand. She speaks with an older man, also in finery. We can hear snippets of their conversation. The woman says, Do you realize that this action might prompt an unfavorable reaction from the devotaries? The older man says, Yes, brightness. The woman says, Even the king of Kharbranth must think of the Ardent's wishes. They have much sway here, your majesty. The king, who is Taravangian, says, As do I. You needn't worry about me. I will handle the Ardents. The woman says, Very well. Your terms are agreeable. Lead me to the location and I shall see what can be done. She looks behind her shoulder and notices Shallan. If you will excuse me as we walk, however, I have someone to attend to. Taravangian says, Of course, brightness. The woman, who we now know as Yasna Kholin, waves over Shallan, and they begin to talk as they walk. Shallan says, I am Shallan Devar, whom you asked to meet with. I deeply regret not being able to get to you in Dumadari. Yasna says, The fault was not yours. I didn't expect that you would make it on time, and I wasn't certain where I would be going after Dumadari when I sent you that note. However, I am impressed by your tenacity, child. Shallan says, I honestly didn't expect you to follow me this far. After Carbranth, I was going to forego leaving you notes, as I'd presumed that you would have given up. Most do after the first few stops. You mean this was a test of sorts? Shalon says. Yasna says, yes indeed. Perhaps I will actually allow you to petition me for a place as my ward. Shalon says, Brightness, I thought, well, your letter. Yasna says, I gave you leave to meet me, Miss Devar. I did not promise to take you on. The training and care of a ward is a distraction for which I have little tolerance or time at the present. But you have traveled far. I will entertain your request, though understand that my requirements are quite strict. Shalon looks disappointed but says nothing. Yasna raises an eyebrow. No tantrum. That is a good sign. Shalon says, Tantrum, Brightness. From a light-eyed woman? Yasna says, you'd be surprised. Attitude alone will not earn your place. Tell me, how extensive is your education? Shalon says, extensive in some areas, extensively lacking in others. Yasna says, then we shall do an evaluation. Answer truthfully and do not exaggerate, as I will discover your lies. Feign no false modesty either. I have no patience for a stimperer. Shalon says, yes, Brightness. Yasna says, let's begin with music. How would you judge your skill? Shalon says, I have a good ear, Brightness. I'm best with the voice, though I have been trained on the zither and pipes. I would be far from the best you've heard, but I'd also be far from the worst. I know most historical ballads by heart. Yasna says, give me the refrain from Lilting Aradin. Shalon says, here? Yasna says, I'm not fond of repeating myself, child. Shalon sings the song. It sounds mostly good. Yasna says, good. Languages. Shalon says, I can speak your native Alethi, obviously. I have a passable knowledge of Thalen, and good spoken Asish. I can make myself understood in Saleh, but not read it. Yasna says, writing? I know all of the major, minor, and topical glyphs, and I can paint them calligraphically. Yasna says, so can most children. Shalon says, the glyph words I paint are regarded by those who know me as quite impressive. Yasna says, glyph words. I have reason to believe you wanted to be a scholar, not a purveyor of superstitious nonsense. Shalon says, I have kept a journal since I was a child, in order to practice my writing skills. Yasna says, congratulations. Should I have need of someone to treatise on their stuffed pony, or give me an account of an interesting pebble they discovered, I shall send for you. Is there nothing more you can offer me that shows you have true skill? Shalon says, with all due respect, Brightness, you have a letter from me yourself, and it was persuasive enough to make you grant me this audience. Yasna says, a valid point. It took you long enough to make it. How was your training in logic and its related arts? Shalon says, I am accomplished in basic mathematics, and I often helped with minor accounts for my father. Yasna says, how do you fare with philosophy? Shalon says, I have read through the completed works of Hormus, Nashan, Nali the Just, and of course, know of Dawn. Yasna asks, Placini, Aberthaeon, Eustria, Manoline, Sussex, Shashka daughter Hasworth. Shalon says, no, Brightness. Yasna says, I see. Well, what of history? Shalon says, this is one of the areas where I am obviously deficient, Brightness. My father was never able to find me a suitable tutor. I have read the history books he owns. Yasna says, which were? Shalon says, the entire set of Belisha Lan's topics, mostly. Yasna says, barely worth the time scribing them. A popular survey of historical events at best. Shalon says, I apologize, Brightness. Yasna says, now this is an embarrassing hole. History is one of the most important of the literary subarts. One would think that your parents would have taken specific care in this area, if they'd hoped to submit you to study under a historian like myself. Shalon says, my circumstances are unusual, Brightness. Yasna says, ignorance is hardly unusual, Miss Devar. The longer I live, the more I have come to realize that it is the natural state of the human mind. There are many who will strive to defend its secrecy, and then expect you to be impressed with their efforts. Oh well, let us move on to the sciences then. What can you say of yourself there? Shalon says, I have a reasonable foundations in the sciences of you might expect of a young woman my age. Yasna asks, which means? I can speak with skill about geography, geology, physics, and chemistry, I've made a particular study of biology and botany, as I was able to pursue them with a reasonable level of independence on my father's estates. But if you expect me to solve Fabrician's conundrum with a wave of my hand, I suspect you shall be disappointed. Yasna says, Have I not a right to make reasonable demands of my potential students, Miss Devar? Shallan says, Reasonable? Your demands are about as reasonable as the ones made of the Tin Heralds on Proving Day. All due respect, Brightness, you seem to want a potential wards to be master scholars already. I may be able to find a pair of 80-year-old ardents in the city who might fit your requirements. They could interview for the position, though they might have trouble hearing well enough to answer your questions properly. Yasna says, I see. And do you speak with such pique to your parents as well? Shallan says, No, Brightness. I do not speak to them this way, nor should I to you. I apologize. Yasna says, Well, at least you are humble enough to admit your faults. Still, I am disappointed. How is it that your mother considered you ready for a wardship? My mother passed away when I was a child, Brightness. Yasna nods her head. And your father soon remarried. Malise Gevelmar, I believe. Shallan says, My stepmother passed away recently. She didn't send me to be your ward. I took this initiative myself. Yasna says, My condolences. Perhaps you should be with your father, seeing to his estate and comforting him, rather than wasting my time. Shallan says, My father has no need of me, but I have a great need of you, as this interview itself has proven. If ignorance galls you so much, can you, in good conscience, pass up the opportunity to rid me of mine? Yasna says, I've done so before, Miss Debar. You are the 12th young woman to ask me for a wardship this year. The two of them come into a large opening, surrounded by buildings. A massive carved structure is built into the side of a mountain. In front of its entrance, a massive chunk of rock rests. It's part of the ceiling, which is caved in. The king sighs and gestures to it. He calls to Yasna. The dangers of living in a city built directly into the rock. Yasna says, When did this happen? Taravangian says, During the recent high storm, Brightness. The palace architects might be able to cut away into the room, but it would take time, and the next high storm is scheduled to hit in just a few days. Beyond that, breaking in might bring down more of the ceiling. Shallan looks confused. She says out loud, I thought Kharbranth was protected from the high storms, Your Majesty. Yasna shoots her a look, and Shallan shrinks back. She stops talking. The king merely smiles. City is sheltered, young woman, but the stone mountain behind us is buffeted quite strongly. Sometimes it causes avalanches on the side, and that can cause the entire mountainside to shake. Cave-ins are very rare, and we thought this area was quite safe, but... Yasna says, But it is rock, and there is no telling if a weak vein lurks just beyond the surface. This will be difficult. I will probably lose a very valuable focal stone. Taravangian says, If only we had shard blades. Yasna says, I was not seeking to renegotiate our bargain, Your Majesty. Access to the Palanaeum is worth the cost. You will want to send someone for wet rags. Have the majority of the servants move down to the other end of the hallway. You may want to wait there yourself. Taravangian says, I will stay here. I will not hide like a coward when my granddaughter is trapped. Yasna turns to Shallan. Miss Devar, how would you go about calculating the size of this rock? Shallan says, Well, I suppose I'd ask His Majesty. His architects probably calculated it. Yasna nods her head. An elegant response. Did you do that, Your Majesty? Taravangian says, Yes, Brightness Kulin. It is roughly 15,000 kevels. Yasna says, A point in your favor, Miss Devar. A scholar knows not to waste time rediscovering information that is already known. It is a lesson I sometimes forget. Now then. Servants pass between them, handing out wet cloths to everyone. Shallan takes one. We see Yasna hold her jeweled hand out. It touches the rock. The stones on her hands begin to faintly glow. Then her hand shrinks into the rock as if it's water. Shallan's eyes go wide. The men and women around her all begin to hold the wet cloths to their nose. Shallan does the same. There's a cracking sound and a flash of light. The stone is gone, and in its place, a massive cloud of smoke flows. Yasna gives no reaction as the crowd surrounds her. Shallan studies the soul caster on her hand. One of its gems is cracked. We see Shallan's eyes as they watch the strange device. They're filled with hunger and greed. She wants the soulcaster that Yasuna has. We're gonna cut to the slave wagon. We see Kaladin in the wagon. Its armored sides are up, and we hear rain splashing against the wooden cage. Thunder rumbles distance. One of the two guards approaches and opens up the cage, letting its barricaded sides down and leaving them open to the wind. Kaladin says, "A little early to be taking down the sides, Bluth. We're not even to the riddance yet." Bluth says, "Master wants you pretty clean today." Kaladin asks, "Why?" Bluth says, "Not your business." He wanders off, leaving the slaves soaking in the rain of the high storm. Outside the bars of the cage, we see a group of windsprings swirling through the air like leaves. They chase after the distant storm. Suddenly, a blur of bright light appears to Kaladin. It turns back into the young woman form that the windsprint has been using. Kaladin says, "I saw others of your kind." The sprint says, "Others?" She begins to dance on Kaladin's palm. Kaladin says, "Windsprin, dancing after the high storm. Are you certain you don't want to go with them?" She says, "Nope, I like it here." Then she says, "There are others nearby. Others like you." Kaladin says, "Slaves?" The sprint says, "I don't know. People. Not like the ones here. Other ones." Kaladin says, "Where?" The sprint looks around for a second, then points off towards the east. "There. Many of them. Lots and lots." Kaladin stands. He can see smoke in the distance. The slave wagon moves over a hill. Kaladin's eyes go wide. He says, "Great Father of Storms." In the distance, we can see a giant riven plain of rock, so wide that we can't see the other side. It's split into chasms that are massive and dug deep into the earth. They run all throughout the Great Plains, forming a jagged mosaic of uneven plateaus. Some are large, some are tiny. It's massive, though, and seems to go on forever. Around the great chasms, we see a huge army encampment, filled with tents and soldiers and moving people, even large permanent stone buildings. Many of them fly banners with different colors and symbols. Kaladin says, "The Shattered Plains." He sounds almost distraught. The sprint says, "What? What's wrong?" Kaladin says, "I spent years trying to get to this place. It's what Tien wanted in the end, at least. To come here, fight in the king's army. And now I'm here." A young slave perks up. "The Shattered Plains? That's the king's army." An older slave says, "Perhaps we'll find justice here. His slaves have to be better off, too. We'll be in foreign lands. We'll even make wages." Kaladin ignores them and sits back down. But he couldn't hide the smile on his face. He had a chance to fight again. A chance to hold a spear once more, and better than that, in the king's army, fighting on the Shattered Plains. Kaladin has a chance. We're gonna cut to a room. We see a bed with white sheets against a wall made from stone. An older woman lies on the bed, with a large wound cut across their face. A soldier lays on a bed, with a large wound cut across their face. It's festering and rotten. We can see Rotsprin clinging to it. He lightly moans. We hear footsteps echoing. A woman arrives beside the bed. A woman arrives at the bedside. She's also dressed in white. It has a strange white veil blocking her face. She holds a small cup. The wounded man's eyes turn to look at her. The woman holds the cup up to his lips. She says, "Drink." The man says, "What is it?" The woman says, "Medicine. It'll make you whole." The man nods, then drinks. His face recoils. The drink was clearly bitter. He lays on his back. The woman pulls out a small book and pen. She taps her pen, as if waiting for something. We see blood begin to run from the man's nose. His eyes go wide. Suddenly he begins to seize, thrusting his body back and forth on the bed. His lips begin to quiver, then open. "10 orders. We were loved once. Why have you forsaken us, Almighty? Shard of my soul, where have you gone? Oh, Storm Father, we are his. But it is but 1,000 days, and the Everstorm comes." Suddenly, he's still. His eyes are bloodshot red. Blood runs from his nose and his eyes. He's dead. The nurse picks up the cup and folds away her notepad. She makes her way to a station and sets the cup down. In a small jar on the table, We can see purple leaves stored in a glass container, black bane, poison. And that's where we're going to end episode 1.
Well, that was fun. I hope you all enjoyed. The beginning of this series is a little convoluted and confusing by its nature. You're trying to understand what's going on in the world, so bear with it, either with the audiobook or the physical copy or this series if you're watching that going forward. Sanderson is awesome. He has lots of other books if you like this. You can check all that out in the links below. Again, thank you so much for watching all the way through this. That's crazy, dude. This is like very long. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all in the next one.